Hello, I'm Alissa Nutting, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2024 Brooklyn Book Festival's virtual festival day for a conversation with Myriam Lacroix, Lexi Freiman, and Tony Tulathimutte. Before we begin, I want to let you know that books by the authors in this program can be purchased in the link below. Let me introduce you to our three great irreverent authors. Myriam Lacroix was born in Montreal to a Quebecois mother and a Moroccan father. She currently lives in Vancouver, British Columbia. She has a BFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia and an MFA from Syracuse University, where she was editor-in-chief of Salt Hill Journal and received the New York Public Humanities Fellowship for creating Outfront, an LGBTQ plus writing group whose goal was to expand the possibilities of queer writing. Lexi Freiman is an Australian writer and editor who graduated from Columbia's MFA program in 2012. Her first novel, In Appropriation, was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize and the Miles Franklin Award. Her newest book is The Book of Ayn. She also writes for television. Tony Tulathimutte is the author of Private Citizens and Rejection. His work has appeared in the Paris Review, N+1, The Nation, The New Republic, and the New York Times. The recipient of an O. Henry Award and a Whiting Award, he runs the writing class Crit in Brooklyn, and his newest novel, Rejection, is longlisted for the National Book Award this year. Thank you, Myriam, Lexi, and Tony for joining us. So I want to start off, the panel's name is an ode to irreverence. And so I was looking up a lot of different definitions of irreverence, all of which really center around this kind of concept of disrespect, which got me thinking about the respect and disrespect binary, about the propensity in our culture to say a very disrespectful thing and follow it up with respectfully, the way that we use irreverence kind of in daily language to help us convey things that maybe ideas or feelings or rage that is perhaps outside of mainstream acceptability. So I wanted to kind of open by asking each of you, what does irreverence mean to you, either or both in terms of your fiction in general, but specifically in these three new books that we have, Rejection by Tony, The Book of Ayn, and How It Works Out.
Yeah, irreverence is kind of a interesting phrase because I was thinking of, your books, in relation to this term. I'm like, would you call Tampa irreverent? Maybe it's just kind of like a highly subjective judgment to make about a book because it depends on what the reader thinks automatically commands respect to begin with. And that might not even be the intention of the writer, right? Like a writer might just be being like, I'm just trying to be honest and straightforward and describe things the way that I see them. And you ended up touching on, very easily on people's like sensitivities that way, when that might not have been the intention, right? Just because of a, conflict or disagreement in how you perceive things. Yeah, I think that when the term is usually used, like irreverence, what it means is that like it's not doing any sort of like discernible work to mollify a reader and reassuring them that you like believe the same things as them, or that there's like no way to construe what you've written in an offensive way. And that's like a really millennial neurosis, I think, right? To be like, I need to sort of cover my ass and cover my bases to make sure that people are not going to misread me. But I think that's, when you're dealing with narrative, kind of the wrong way of approaching it. Like you're actually designing something to be interpreted in multiple ways, or construed however the reader wants to do it. If you have too tight a grip on that, then you're basically just kind of like, writing, your own sort of propaganda, right?
Mm.
Yeah, I guess I can jump off. I mean, I guess I'll start by saying that like yeah, irreverence is an interesting term. I do think in general I just appreciate boldness. Like it keeps me interested. And I think like Tony is saying, I kind of think of, at least in my work, the irreverence as like more just like honesty. And yeah, I guess I'm French Canadian, right? We're like really very direct, crude. We say it as it is, and like everyone can deal with it. And I think that being in the English world, I've found it like very, I don't know, it's made me feel all sorts of ways about myself. Like, am I some like deviant or something? Because I don't know how to be like proper and polite, I think um yeah, in the book that I was writing, not a surprise that it's based on a real relationship, and a dynamic in that relationship was definitely like that I was kind of like publicly embarrassing because I like said things exactly how I thought them all of the time. And I think that comes out in the book in this kind of like exaggerated way. Like I had to like explore just how true that actually is, through the character named Myriam.
I guess I agree with what you were saying, Tony, in terms of how irreverence is sort of subjective and often not necessarily the intention of an author. It's just the way they see the world. But I guess if I'm going to be honest about my own work, I definitely am consciously playing with irreverence. And I think that it interests me because it has like a sort of spaciousness or something inside it, which I guess I contrast to something more earnest, or kind of what you were saying, the sort of millennial neuroses around like trying to sort of mollify or really clarify exactly what you mean. I like the ambiguity and the space for misinterpretation, and I think yeah, it's an interesting place to find, the spots where the truth doesn't feel quite as solid as we think it is. It's sort of, there's like more give or something in irreverence. And obviously that's, part of humor and the way that paradox works. So I think I like it because it feels like a sort of more exciting, mysterious, dangerous place to play inside of. Yeah.
So can I ask you, Lexi, like, let's say that you have a reader, who takes this openness into interpretation, and then, from that is just like, oh, now I feel offended, right? If a reader comes to you with like a response like that, are you like, well, now it's doing what it says on the tin, like it's working as intended, and I'm fine with that? Or is there anything inside of you that thinks like, oh, maybe I should have like, that was like not intentional, or maybe that like they're supposed to know that I'm trying to offend them, or things like that?
I mean, it depends obviously on what exactly the offensive thing is, but yeah, I mean, I guess at some level, I feel like I have to kind of trust that I've done my work in the sense of communicating whatever that information is inside of the context of a character with their psychology, and then it's like it's a complex sort of equation that I'm working with. I'm not just like throwing out you know phrases that might be offensive. It's sort of, it exists within a world that I've spent a lot of time building. So I could be wrong. I could have missed something. I could have offended someone and not have anticipated that. But for the most part, I imagine that whatever the thing is, I'm going to, it won't be a surprise that someone has taken offense. It's like there's something deliberate in that, but there's also kind of a thesis or a larger argument that's kind of hopefully working as scaffolding around that. And if the reader hasn't picked up on that, or I don't know, I could have made a mistake, but it's not as sort of incidental as that, I guess.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. Like, empty provocation is really easy, right? Like all you'd have to do really is like throw in a slur that is just like completely unprompted, and it's easy to outrage people like that, and you never feel good when you feel like you achieve some kind of effect in a cheap way, right? So yeah, it is almost like you have to kind of earn the right to get people legitimately mad or make them burn calories on it.
There's
Yeah, exactly.
actually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
Oh, there was actually a great kind of like chestnut of that. I feel like kind of in the opening of your book, that I'll just read really quickly. The protagonist is saying, I was just trying to write humorous fiction and trying to bring a little slapstick to the ongoing national tragedy. Comedy was meant to transcend dreary morality and unite people in mutual understanding of truth. The bad haircuts and misspelled tattoos and how the main character shat his pants 3 times in one chapter were all penned with a higher literary intention. It wasn't funny to say the wrong thing because you could. It was funny to say the true thing because it was wrong. So yeah, just kind of in thinking about wrongness, I guess, and how that can not only like lead to humor, but also create sort of these traps maybe for the writer of wanting to convey sort of what you're wanting to convey, and not think too much of, oh, what are like all of the possible readings and misinterpretations of this, and how could it be misconstrued, like what do I need to do so that I'm meeting my goal, but I'm also like making sure kind of that it's not misunderstood in this way, but I also know I can't control it after a certain extent. So I wanted to ask about beginnings. Can I just read the first sentence of each of these books from you genius sickos, really respectfully. Sickos. Okay, so the meaning of life. They planned on getting beer from Toby's, but instead they got a baby, and they were not unhappy about it. Lexi, I could trace my contrarianism back to age 3 when I'd painted the walls of my parents' bedroom with my own poop. Tony, and this is from the opening story, The Feminist. If you ask him where he went to high school, he likes to boast that actually he went to an all-girls school. So each of the first lines kind of contains this like inherent provocation. They're funny, they're like comparing or contrasting to sort of very different things. They're grabbing your attention and kind of going off, the point that Tony was raising also in terms of kind of like what responsibility is owed, I suppose, when writing something offensive. How do beginnings play into that for each of you, whether kind of in these books or more generally? Do you feel that sort of when you're writing something irreverent, it's important to be irreverent from the beginning? What kind of responsibility do you feel opening an irreverent work?
I'm not going first this time. Let's flip it up.
I feel like I've been talking too much.
All right, I'll go. I mean, I don't think I have a great answer for that because I don't think I started my book being like gonna write something irreverent now. Yeah, if anything, I feel like I've been kind of
That was my entire premise for the discussion.
yeah.
I don't know where to go from here.
Fair enough. Yeah, actually, I'll kind of funny little segue, but Tony, I just like followed you on Instagram. I, anyways, I really love the feminist, and I'm really excited to read your book. But I saw like that in your like in your reviews, you kind of highlighted all the like I don't know, all the like disturbingly delightful, like beautifully barf worthy, like you know, just like, all those like adjectives that have been like plastered all over my own reviews. And I feel like I was really surprised by that. To be honest, I was like, you know, the world has such disturbing things that it engages with all the time. Like everyone's obsessed with like serial killers and like really graphic murders of naked women on the screen and all of that. And I'm like, I wrote a cute lesbian thing that has a bit of cannibalism in it. Like, get over it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that like it's a matter of expectations, right? Like you know, we expect that of the news, but I think that the general expectation when you're like cracking a literary novel in, you know, in America at least, is that like oh, this is going to be, you know, thoughtful and sort of nutritious intellectually, and you know, it's not going to piss me off. Right. You know, it's if it was, if I knew that going into it, then I, you know, might not have like chosen to read it because, you know, I'm doing this to escape from other things that are more stressful in the life, or if I'm here for sort of quiet contemplation or something. But of course, obviously, you know, writing an art can do anything, can achieve any sort of effect. And you know, to go back to the question of like beginnings, they're really important, of course, because that's where you're calibrating people's expectations. And it's very hard to go completely aggro at the beginning of a story because, you know, you end up, you know, alienating the reader without giving them a reason to stick around. So you know, you when you're usually going in some sort of a subversive direction, you need to provide something to subvert first, right? You think that you're on kind of terra firma, and then so it's only later that you realize that, you know, once you're sort of too deeply bought into the story, things are starting to turn on you, right? But yeah, you know, I think that outrage is kind of an interesting concept because, like in again in America, I think that like the high ground is tends to be given to the person who feels that they're receiving offense, right? That like another the thing that is like if you have pissed somebody off, the assumption is that you violated some kind of like a you know, rational social norm, and that you need to apologize for it. When really people, you know, can be just as wrong for feeling offended by something just based on shoddy premises. You know, and this could be the person who is giving offense who is, you know, has done nothing wrong, right? So anyway, that's enough.
Oh no, this thing started. In terms of that beginning, I guess, God, it changed so many times. I don't know what the intention was anymore.
It
But
didn't begin with like, is there, I mean, I feel like there's something especially invigorating like about like eschatological, you know, first sentence in particular. I mean, like it's quite, you know, like it's a very sort of like specific engagement you're joining.
yes, I think talking about, well, I think part of what I was doing in that first line is also setting up this idea of contrarianism as tied to shit, really. You know, just this idea of like literally throwing shit at the wall and sort of seeing what sticks, or what kind of reaction you can get, which is sort of a big part of this character's personality. And because this is sort of the central trauma in her life, that she painted the walls of her parents' bedroom with her own poop, again, it kind of ties to this idea of trauma, which is another kind of provocation in the book, this idea of the sort of, I don't know, supremacy of trauma, that trauma is the only lens through which we can kind of understand and interpret the world. And so sort of putting it up front felt important to me, as a way to sort of start by undermining it, and then obviously let that unravel over the course of the book. But yes, in a way, it was a cheap shot to just put shit in the first sentence, as a kind of tool of provocation. But I think I followed through with all the shit in.
I mean, I think I mean, it's worth pointing out too that the character there that we're introduced to is a baby, right? That's just like, you're not gonna condemn or be too harsh about something that somebody did when they were like 3 years old. If it was introduced like, yeah, I was 27 and I painted my parents shit, that would be different. But that is sort of an example, I think, of that kind of like, I'm not fully coming out guns blazing here. Like, there's a reason to be compelled with somebody. They're saying it in this kind of sheepish tone, or like you're not going to immediately be hostile to them when they say something like that.
Well, yes, and I guess it is playing with this idea of if you put the trauma up front, then no one can judge you, which is a sort of an idea that's examined in the book as well. Just this idea of, do we have to be explaining ourselves at every moment for the sort of offensive, potentially, things that we say or think, or So yes, talking about what a child did, but obviously the sort of whatever awareness they had at that stage of life. I think that is a way to kind of ingratiate the character at the same time as sort of presenting them in all their mess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to talk about judgment, and I mean, like likability is sort of this like eternal. I don't know. I think I'm being like a little irreverent and bratty, even like bringing up the word likability, but I find it interesting in terms of judgment, and also in terms of kind of the, sort of like in gymnastics, when on the bars, like they go so high and they go all the way around the bar. I feel so often that like characters can, become so almost unlikable that, like there is sort of like this like tipping from judgment to pity or empathy, kind of like these magical back and forths. I wanted to read kind of like this quick excerpt from Myriam's book. And so the character kind of has, how would you explain kind of like the premise in a nutshell, Myriam, of like these different possible lives?
Okay, yeah, I know this one. Okay, how it works out is a relationship multiverse, in which each chapter offers an alternate outcome to queer relationship between Myriam and Allison. It kind of follows the arc of the relationship, so it starts with like dreamy hopes and dreams that we have for relationships in the beginning, and then as we follow the relationship, the hypotheticals get a bit more complicated, twisted, darkly funny, as they like to say.
So in this one, kind of the Myriam is well, you'll see, but the love interest is beginning to fool around with someone else, despite Myriam's precarious situation. She grabs both my wrists in her huge baseball glove of a hand and pushes me down onto her desk. She tugs down my jeans, my briefs, and begins to ebb and flow into me in a motion that feels as ancient and mighty as the universe itself. I'm a little plastic bottle caught in bees' tides, sliding around on the desk with surprising ease. There's something under my butt. Miriam's medical file, acting as a kind of lubricant, a surfboard upon which I ride the waves of pleasure crashing harder and harder into me. A gentle vibration pulses against my groin, spreading through my body. I think it's going to throw me over the edge, but B stops abruptly, pulling her pager out of her pocket. She takes one look and runs out the door. I pull up my pants and follow her down the hallway toward Miriam's room. Miriam's eyes are rolled back in her head, veiny white balls showing through parted lids. Her mouth is filled with vomit like a little cup. In her hand, her phone is buzzing with Twitter notifications. Beyond the pulse of her phone, the heart monitor screams its monotonous, embarrassingly high-pitched scream. So we kind of have this, version where a character is, I mean, literally kind of having sex atop, her dying lover's medical file. There's a lot going on in terms of kind of reverence and irreverence with the dying lover. And I wanted to ask, about aggregate also, kind of like in works where we have obscenity, where characters doing, things that are, very often judged as bad or wrong or immoral. Was it easier kind of having all of these very different alternate, sort of like paths to, be able to kind of like let the character go and, and have very bad behavior in some? Or how do you all feel kind of about that calibration kind of when we can let the character be awful, but like not make bad behavior so ubiquitous it isn't telling us something, or doesn't become like wallpaper, or doesn't seem to be kind of like reduced.
Yeah, I guess I'll answer first because it's my thing. Yeah, I do think that the multiverse thing did make it easier to be a little bit like bold and cheeky, because I kind of thought of them as like they're kind of these like dreams and nightmares, And so if you're going and it kind of goes into the into the nightmare, not too late in the book, but funny nightmares. But I think it's just, for me, the whole exercise was like, what's like your deepest fear about your relationships, and like how other people see you and the way that you will be loved. And like, I just don't, it's like if you're gonna be really effective about it, then you have to go all the way. And for me, I guess that meant like your top mask lover realizing that they like to be topped when you're like dying next door and they're like fucking the doctor.
Pretty great fiction scenario.
Yeah, I think like on the question of like likability, people actually are not bothered by like bad behavior from characters when it's very clear where your sympathies are supposed to lie, right? Like if somebody's sort of clearly labeled as a villain and then they act villainously, then that doesn't disturb anything in the reader's mind. Like American Psycho, obviously people had a strong reaction to just the extreme violence and the sort of graphic nature of the writing itself. But the book's called American Psycho. You sort of like get what you sign up for, and that fact in itself actually makes it sort of easier to digest. It's when the reader feels almost like they were tricked into like identifying with the character, and then the character sort of makes a turn And then you're like, wait a minute, like, you know, now this is sort of starting to get on me, right? Because I had sort of invested a bit of myself, or I could see some of myself in this person who is now becoming ugly. And to me, that's where you know, at its extremes, you know, you see phenomena online sometimes, like, you know, people getting furious in some sort of book series that their like comfort character is behaving in a way that's just like, that wouldn't be, that's not my Snape. That wouldn't be what my Snape does, or whatever. And then they feel almost this weird entitlement or ownership over this thing that they haven't written, because they have, you know, felt like they were sold a bill of goods about like whether this person was supposed to be good or bad, identifiable or not, relatable or not, and then that, you know, the rug was pulled out from under them, right?
Mm. Yeah, I guess I feel like the place where I sort of get most vigilant or nervous about this is more the kind of secondary characters. Like the protagonist to me feels like, you know, there's so much there. There's so many different parts to her, and we understand her at so many, you know, we understand we're getting her thoughts. We understand how she sees the world, her backstory, what she's going through. That to me feels like it sort of takes care of itself in terms of the balance of good and bad things that this person says or thinks. And to me, it's sort of, I don't know, it's almost like an instinctual thing where it balances out in the end in a way, not that, you know, you're doing some perfect accounting, but there's a sense you have that this person is sort of empathetic enough, like there's enough there. But with the secondary characters that you don't get a lot of them, that's where I start to feel like, oh, is that joke, you know, just like a little too cutting, considering that this person is sort of a bit of a sketch. And it's just kind of trying to figure out like how much of those characters to give without sort of explaining them away too much, just like a few little details, like one of the sort of closest friend to the protagonist, you know, she has some strange conspiracy theory stuff going on, and I didn't want to over explain that and sort of, you know, give her some childhood trauma, or give, you know, there's just a point at which you sort of have to say, this is the world we live in, and there are people who think like this. And if she says enough kind of funny, slightly vaguely endearing things, we're just going to accept that she thinks this weird thing about how, you know, people shouldn't condition their hair because it's I don't know, killing babies or whatever. Like, you just can't get too neurotic about it, I think, at some point. But that's where the likability thing starts to sort of make noise in my head.
Yeah. I just want to jump in on the likability thing, because I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I guess it's like, I understand it's like a risky thing, especially in our current like cultural political climate, to write like bad characters when everyone is like on the lookout and for, like, who's bad in society, you know? This is like, I feel like that's kind of the world that we live in, and obviously if we're writing bad characters, then we're gonna get some of that. But I also just like, I kind of feel like people kind of love it too, right? Like people are looking for it, and like, what better than a book? Because you can like hide behind it and no one knows what you're reading. And I don't know. Yeah, I think that people like, or people, I mean, people that I know and myself, like, kind of do crave this permission to explore what is bad in like an honest way, not to like, I don't know, roll in it joyfully like a pile of shit or something, like, you know, indulging all of the like, I think it can go the other extreme, obviously. You know, I guess I don't know. Sorry, I haven't slept. I'm a bit delirious. I don't know if I should talk about politics, you know, but I just like you know, I think like there's like, when I think of like the rise of the far right, I'm just like, people are like wanting to be bad. They're like have been so, you know, scared of being bad, and now they're just like, I'm racist, you know? Like I think that's like the really radical, extreme bad reaction, but I think like a more reasonable reaction is to just like be able to look at it, you know, and not look away and be like identify with some badness that's inside of you without thinking like you're worthless human being. Like I think it just can be so therapeutic and human and feel good. And I think that's why like even though, you know, some of our books are like people are like, "Ooh, is that okay that I just read that? I don't know. Like I need to go check my like social media conscience meter or whatever." But really they're like, but I kind of love it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you bring up a really good point in that, like, there's sort of a, you know, there's many appeals to reading, of course, but like one of them is the ability to feel like your interpretation of the text is like the correct one, right? That's not like a very noble thing, but is something that some people I feel get out of it. There's a benign, you know, way to do it, to be like, you know, I'm going to argue from my sort of critical standpoint on this story. But then there's like the sort of darker and more ego-driven one where it's like, I'm going to get to say, you know, who's good or bad, whether this book is good or bad on a moral level, right? Whether the writer is a good or bad person, and whether you're good or bad for consuming it and either approving of it or rejecting it, right? And yeah, that the erotic charge of being like a martinet, of being the person who gets to arbitrate these things, is you know, I think part of what drives the zeal behind making these pronouncements on a book. And yeah, this is why it gets uncomfortable when you have a situation where it's harder to make those like arguments. And you know, to go back to the point about earning it, uh, you know, it's not fun for anybody, I think, when it's really clear that the author is holding up a character for condemnation, and they're based on some sort of a flat archetype that, you know, readers already know that they're supposed to, I recognize this kind of person, and I know that I'm supposed to dislike them. And so, you know, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? So things just only get really enjoyable when, you know, they don't exactly know where they're supposed to stand. And that, you know, just when you feel sort of secure in sympathizing with a character or denouncing them or whatever, it sort of takes a sudden jolt in the other direction.
I mean, yeah, I just think that's sort of the definition of bad satire, what you just described, where it's like, yes, we all know that's the bad guy, that's the dummy, and we're supposed to have this feeling and these thoughts about them, and it's just kind of obvious. And yeah, speaking of erotic charge, I just think that you know, novels are a great place to explore the erotic charge of transgression. Like that's, I think people are so hungry for that. And
Erotic charge of transgression. This
yeah.
is so great. We should have that as like a sub, you know, title for like, that's really great. I think that would drive the views.
I do think it's sort of, you know, in terms of people wanting to be bad, I don't know. I'd have to, I mean, the place where I think of it is sort of like in porn. I feel like there's so much, there's this kind of like insatiable hunger for just the more transgressive and more kind of, you know, and part of that is just the addictive quality of porn, watching a lot of porn, and you kind of sort of adjust to a certain level of whatever, and it's like a drug, and you've got to keep kind of raising the stakes. But I think, yeah, there is sort of there is something in the going on at that erotic level where that feels unsatisfied, and I would say it's our job to, you know, give the people what they need, which yeah, is some kind of, and it doesn't even have to be sexual. It's often not. It's like just ideas that that are not just, as we said, not just provocative, not just, but have a sort of dangerous kind of feeling to them that then, are part of some larger schema that, has some real intelligence to it. So it's not literally dangerous culturally or politically. I think like that's what people are probably quite hungry for. I am.
Yeah. So for my final question, I want to kind of speak to that intelligence, because I do often feel like sometimes like obscenity or irreverence, or the different containers of what we want to call it, it kind of is accused of lowering the moral tone that whether it's like in kind of like highbrow literary circles, or even popular culture, and I would just like to kind of end getting your thoughts on how the profane and the reverential actually interact really well in all three of these books. I wanted to read an excerpt from Rejection. So this is about a character masturbating, which also seems like a good place to go out on. He becomes conscious of how his furtive and constant masturbation, which has always felt oddly sacramental, is not, maybe never was, an outlet for thwarted lust. It is a pacifier, a syringe of oblivion. He has accepted that it is the form of love that fate has assigned to him, one-sided and ersatz, the only one available to him in this lifetime. Nobody gets a perfect life, and the sane thing to do is to stop hoping for one and enjoy what he can. Too bad, he thinks, that his honesty about his true nature has come too late to spare him any grief. And for me, that's so, true and beautiful and poignant. And I can see a lot of traditional paths to sort of that epiphany. And this is a very non-traditional path to that epiphany. So, I mean, I think like the initial joy, and this is, true of all three of these books, kind of coming across, these incredible moments like that, is surprise, I think. But there's a lot operating as well. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to ask all of you about the reverential, about kind of like the sacred, or these moments of humanity, and why the profane or the irreverent or the obscene can sometimes actually be like the best or most beautiful, or in some cases, I think the only path to those epiphanies.
Yeah, I think this is a good time to sort of make a distinction between different kinds of profanity, right? Because on one level, like there are people who will be offended just if you describe sex or describe shit, and that sort of speaks to a really just kind of deep and primal sort of pollution taboo in the culture. I for one, like, do not really find descriptions or depictions of sex and filth to be offensive in themselves. So that's something for myself, I can just sort of dismiss out of hand. And it's important to note that like the passage that you read, the context of it comes immediately after about, I think either before or after, about 4,000 words of just sustained masturbation fantasy that goes to a pretty wild place, I think. And then there's like the sort of higher order of profanity, where people feel like you have profaned something sacred to them, something that's tied to their belief or their identity, right? And there, of course, you tread more carefully because they would actually sort of have a point. But yeah, I think that what that passage is doing is just treating a subject that I think is pretty neutral, which is masturbation, you know, which knowing that some people are offended by those things, but just trying to treat it, you know, seriously or straightforwardly.
I guess I'll say like, yeah, I just want to say like, kind of like, duh, obviously when you go into, you know, not the filth, because we're talking about masturbation, it's not filthy, right? But like when you go into the thick of it, like, and like of course you're gonna get deeper meaning if you're not shying away from certain topics, if you're not tiptoeing. I guess what I'm thinking about right now is like I feel like that's so obvious in like the world of art. You know, like when you're in like all sorts of other mediums, you're not seeing like in modern art museums, you're not really seeing like landscapes anymore, or like polite little paintings of barns. Like I feel like the whole art world has caught on to like we have to be real here. But there's something about literature that feels sometimes a little bit outdated. Like, and I wonder if it's because of like the very idea of literacy and like reading has this ancient like classist thing to it. Like some people think it needs to be like a ballet, you know, like a some sort of like elegant, proper performance. But I don't know. I mean, that's just not, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'm just saying literature is an art just like every other art. And okay,
Yeah, I mean, to build off of that a little bit, like I do think that, like, you know, part of why people respond that way to literature is probably because of the way that the place it sort of occupies in like the larger media ecosystem now. Like now that there are so many more ways and easier ways to sort of receive stories and narratives, that, you know, part of the whole value proposition of reading to begin with is to sort of reinforce one's idea of oneself as a good or intelligent person. And so when you come across a book that doesn't satisfy that or whatever, you can get sort of like upset by it. But yeah, those are just for the really corny, like, you know, reading makes you a better person, you know, people. And of course, we all know plenty of readers who totally suck ass. So
Amen. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Myriam, Lexi, and Tony. Everyone, please remember you can order books in the link below, and please consider making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is celebrating its 19th year of presenting free literary programming. And a reminder that if you are in New York City this week, join us for our citywide bookends and our in-person Children's Day and Festival Day that take place on September 28th and 29th in downtown Brooklyn. Thank you all so much for a great discussion.
yeah, so that's so fun.